Questions without notice. I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. During the 5-week election campaign last year, the Prime Minister promised to cut power prices by $275 per year on 97 occasions. Prime Minister, people took you at your word, but since the election, the Prime Minister has never made mention of it again. Australians are hurting and your government is making the situation worse, not better. Prime Minister, how can Australians trust you and this government when you continue to fail to live up to your word and to your promise?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and the Leader of the Opposition would know full well what the circumstances are, and because he came in here in December and voted against energy price relief, voted against $1.5 billion of support on energy policy. And the Leader of the Opposition might be confused because they had 22 announcements but didn't land one. But over in the Senate, over in the other place, they're discussing the safeguard mechanism. The safeguard mechanism, which is the key to driving down emissions by 43% by 2030, but it's also the key for investment certainty. The investment certainty that business has been crying out for. The business certainty that is absolutely necessary. Now, in the predecessor as Prime Minister, of course, now the member for Cook, in September 2018, said this: Angus Taylor has one job, get electricity prices down. That was what he said. Now, the member for Cook isn't known for wanting just one job. That won't be in the biographies that are written about the member for Cook, because multiple jobs were given out to all those opposite.
The Prime Minister will return to the question and not refer to matters not included in the question. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The question was very deliberate in its construct. There are families who are hurting, struggling to pay their power bills, and they want a straight answer from their Prime Minister.
Order. There is no need for commentary with a point of order. Just going to get the Prime Minister back to return to the question regarding the policy that he was asked about.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And the fact is that Claire Savage, the Australian energy regulator, has said that the work that we put in place last December has already made a substantial difference. Philip Lowe, the RBA Governor, says the same thing. The figures today on inflation are promising. We wouldn't put it more than that. We know that people are doing it tough, but inflation is heading in the right direction, which is a positive thing off its peak. And what we need to do is to do further work. We understand that that's the case, and that's what my government's focus is.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This year marks 50 years since the end of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War. What action is the Albanese government taking to honour the service of our veterans?
Good question. Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hasluck, and I thank all the members of Parliament who attended the ceremony that was held this morning. This year we mark half a century since Australian guns fell silent in Vietnam. 60,000 Australians served in that conflict. More than 3,000 were wounded, and tragically 523 were killed. Futures were robbed, lives were changed forever, for those who went and for those who loved them. And yet for so long the truth is that we as a nation didn't measure up to them, to those people who served in our name, who did their duty in our name. We didn't hold up their names so proudly. So to each and every one of our Vietnam veterans today, I say we honour you and we thank you for your service. And this morning, I had the great privilege, along with the Minister for Veterans Affairs, to present 10 veterans who are here with us in the gallery today, and I welcome you, with the commemorative medallion and certificate of commemoration. Barney Hanson, Brian Armstrong, Colleen Thurger, Jerry Mapstone, John Moore, Mac Weller, Noel McLaughlin, Pedro Rosemond, Ray Lastell and Rodney O'Regan. To all of you, I say thank you for your service. To the men and women who serve us, continue to serve us in the Australian Defence Force, we thank you for your service as well. We also want to acknowledge the families of Vietnam veterans for their sacrifice and their support. We will continue to honour, particularly in this 50th year, the veterans who served our nation, and we should give them the gratitude of our nation. I'm sure that I can speak on behalf of every member of this parliament on this occasion, that we do honour you, and in August, of course, when we commemorate to the day on Vietnam Veterans Day, there will be a range of commemorative services around this country as well, and I'm certain that members of parliament from across the spectrum will participate in it. You are very welcome here, and I honour you today.
And on indulgence, I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On indulgence, I join in support of the Prime Minister's fine words, and it was a great honour to be at the ceremony this morning. As people in the galleries here today and people who are watching Question Time, if you look up to those people who are sitting in the front row of the gallery there, they are our finest Australians. They represent the values of our original Anzacs. They continued through their service whilst in uniform, and in many cases since then, to deliver us a great deal of pride. The treatment of Vietnam veterans when they returned from a war that their government had sent them into were not treated well by any stretch of the imagination. And the mental weight of that has been carried by many, not just veterans but their families as well, in some cases every day since. And I hope today and this year, as we commemorate the 50th anniversary, they understand the pride that we have in their service and the way in which they've contributed to our country. Like the Prime Minister, I acknowledge the fact that 60,000 Australians were involved in serving in Vietnam, 15,000 were conscripted, 523 lives were lost, 3,000 were wounded, but many people came back with significant scars, mental and physical. And it's not just the veterans, but their partners, their children, their grandchildren that have borne some of that weight as well. And we pay tribute to them for their sacrifice and the support of their mother or father or aunt or uncle, brother or sister who served in uniform. We live in the greatest country in the world, and in large part it's because of your service and many like you who have gone before you and who are serving in uniform today. We pay you true honour.
I'll give the call to the honourable member for Flinders.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week's ANZ Consumer Confidence Survey shows consumers are as pessimistic as when the pandemic started. It's a bad time to buy major household items, and mortgage holders are increasingly grim. But the Prime Minister says Australians have had a good 10 months. When will this out-of-touch Prime Minister finally admit that Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Flinders for her question, and we certainly know that too many families are doing it tough. Inflation is a problem right around the world. Today's figures showing a downward trend is a positive, but we know there is much more work to do. And our biggest priority this year has been making sure that Australians have that economic security and stability so that they can plan ahead and build better futures. And that's why we're acting on cost of living measures. That's why cheaper medicines began on January 1. That's why cheaper childcare begins on July 1. That's why 180,000 Australians are benefiting from fee-free TAFE. And when I was in the electorate of Aston last Friday with the member for O'Connor and the Minister for Early Childhood, what we had the opportunity to do was to talk to students there who had enrolled in courses in order to secure their future because they were fee-free. And talking to those students, it had made such a difference to them. They were giving it a crack, enrolling in courses, including particularly in the health sector, but other services sector as well, to ensure that they could get secure, well-paid jobs into the future is what they wanted to do. But we're not just doing that. We're expanding paid parental leave to 6 months. We're getting wages moving again. We're also dealing with issues including on housing with our Housing Australia Future Fund that's opposed by those opposite. Earlier today, you had the bizarre situation of those opposite actually calling a division after the Senate returned the National Reconstruction Fund legislation to this parliament. That's about growth, that's about investment, it's about making sure that our economy grows. And on top of that, of course, you have the $1.5 billion in the energy price relief plan, something that was opposed by those opposite.
Member for
Something that was opposed by those opposite.
The
fact is that those opposite come in here, they just oppose everything. They've stopped participating in debate. They're just the observers of Australian politics, the people who just sit back and say no to absolutely everything that is put forward, who never move amendments, who don't have any constructive alternatives.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. What has the Albanese Labor government done to support Australia's manufacturers, and what progress has there been on the National Reconstruction Fund?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker. Well, today we have made a big step in the Parliament, both houses, passing the National Reconstruction Fund. Big one. A good day if you believe in Australian manufacturing. A good day if you believe in good blue-collar jobs. A good day if you believe in backing businesses from our outer suburbs to our regions to remote Australia. Very, very important day. And when I visit Australian industry, as I have over many years, seeing their ambition for those who want to be self-sufficient in the most critical areas of our economy, who want to reduce our dependency on concentrated and broken supply chains, who want to see us be able to create good, secure, well-paying jobs, not just for now but for our kids and for their kids, making sure we've got that economic prosperity long-term. An ambition that government can work with industry to get things done, and most importantly, friends, an ambition that Australia should be a country that makes things. And we work together. Many parliamentarians, not all, many parliamentarians working together in this and the other place to be able to make the NRF better. We talked to all of those who wanted to make a contribution to make it better and to make the country better. That's how we made progress, Speaker. But the only people who didn't want to support manufacturing and see that progress, over there. Every single one of those members didn't just vote once against manufacturing or twice, multiple times. And when the bill came back today, they doubled down on dopiness and wanted to make sure their names were on the list of people against Australian manufacturing. They vote against it straight away, Speaker. They vote against it straight away. They scratch their criticisms on rocks that they chuck at us and then say, why won't you accept our ideas? That is their contribution to it. Now, imagine the fate of the National Reconstruction Fund if we had a Liberal member for Goldstein, or a Liberal member for Curtin, or a Liberal member for Wentworth, or a Liberal member for Kooyong? Have I missed anyone? No, I'll keep going. Liberal member for Mackellar, Liberal member for Warringah.
The member for Hunter.
They would have, a Liberal member in all those seats would have opposed this. Every one of those members can go back to their electorates and say they backed Australian manufacturing. Whereas the big job, and can I tell you, there is one job the NRF has already created. It's a job for every one of them, to go back to their communities and explain why they would not support Australian manufacturing. We've got a vision, we've got a plan, and now we've got the National Reconstruction Fund.
Order. There is far too much noise on my right. The member for Hunter will leave the chamber under 94A for continually interrupting. I can't hear the answers. Give the call to the honourable member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I refer to my repeated lobbying of you and your government to not contribute funding for a third AFL stadium in Tasmania, specifically at Macquarie Point. Frankly, the community remains overwhelmingly opposed to the proposal and rightfully insists that more federal funding go to the things that really matter. Prime Minister, in light of all this, will you rule out funding for this ridiculous idea?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Clark for his question.
Order.
And I am
Members on my
proud
left.
that Labor governments have such a strong history of investing in Tasmania. And I know that in the past I've certainly worked with, as a minister, constructively with the member for, was called something else then, prior to Clark, Denison, with the then member for Denison on constructive proposals, including the $50 million that the federal government provided for the Macquarie Point site way back in 2012. Now, it is true that since then there was a failure to invest and progress urban redevelopment on that site. I think that site is ideal for a significant urban project and renewal for Tasmania. I've thought that for a long period of time, and it is unfortunate that the site still has remediation work to do. I understand the member's position, and he's put it very clearly, but I'll continue to work constructively with the Tasmanian government of Premier Rockliff. I'll continue to engage with him, and as the member knows, the Tasmanian Premier in particular has a very strong view about this. Proposals have been submitted to the government, and they're being considered as part of our budget process, as we do. But it is, at the time in 2012, I said this, a carefully redesigned Macquarie Point precinct has the opportunity to transform the waterfront. It is a project that will boost Hobart's livability, sustainability and the Tasmanian economy. I want to make sure that we move beyond a debate just about a stadium or a non-stadium. I want to move towards making sure that we get appropriate residential, recreational, commercial activity at the site. Ultimately, we want to ensure that whatever happens at Macquarie Point produces maximum benefit for the people of Tasmania, and that is what we'll be working towards. And I'll continue to engage with the member for Clark, as I will with other federal members of parliament, and indeed with the Tasmanian state government, who I enjoy a positive relationship with all of the state governments. I had a positive relationship with Premier Perrottet as well, and I wish him well for his future.
To call to the order, members on my left. We can hear from the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What challenge is the Albanese Labor government facing as a result of the former coalition government's mismanagement of the defence budget?
Order. Give a call to order. Members on my left and right. Give the call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for her question and just say how honoured I am to serve in a caucus with her. Mr Speaker, the former government's, at the heart of the former government's defence strategic posture was making announcements. When it came to announcements, they were a formidable power. They would make announcements at the press club, they'd make announcements at defence bases, they would make announcements with hoopla, they'd make announcements with Top Gun music, they would make announcements about prospective capabilities, but they'd make announcements about announcements, and when the announcements were finished, they would brief the media and we were presented with visions of future next-generation weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles. But what stood behind those announcements was a different story, and often it was absolutely nothing. The 2016 Defence White Paper provided for $30 billion of procurement expenditure through to the decade ending in 2026. Within 2 years, those opposite had quietly reallocated $9 billion of that out of defence. Last March, those opposite made a $10 billion announcement for Red Spice, a critical cyber capability for the Australian Signals Directorate, but it had in it an $8 billion hole. They announced an uplift of 18,500 Defence Force personnel, but they only put aside money for 12,500. The Integrated Investment Program is the 10-year procurement schedule for defence. And after a decade of those opposite making announcements without any funding, it is estimated that the over-programming of the IOP next year will be 32%. Mr Speaker, what that means is that almost 1/4 of what Defence plans to buy, it has absolutely no money for. That is the legacy that those opposite have left us. It is literally all announcement and no delivery. It is as if they thought that they could walk onto the battlefield with a megaphone and announce our adversaries into submission. Well, Mr Speaker, our government is very different. We are serious people, making serious decisions about serious capability with serious money. And that's what we've done with the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines. That's what we'll do with the Defence Strategic Review that we will release next week, because we understand that it is in the making of hard budget decisions that we actually acquire the military capability that we need as a country to keep Australians safe.
The call to the honourable member for Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Gas producers have warned that the Prime Minister's deal with the Greens will create more hurdles and reduce investments in new gas projects. With new projects facing the axe, which will increase energy costs, and IEMO warning Victorians face gas shortages this winter, when will this out-of-touch Prime Minister admit this deal with the Greens will make a bad situation worse for Australian families and Australian businesses?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Menzies for his question about the safeguard mechanism, which is being debated in the Senate as we speak, and that I expect there to be a majority of senators to vote for. We have entered into good faith discussions across this parliament. Across this parliament, those opposite chose not to be involved, chose again to be the observers of Australian politics rather than the participants in Australian politics. And they're asked about what industry has had to say about what has been announced.
The Minister for Infrastructure.
The Business Council of Australia have said this: business welcomes progress towards ending the impasse on climate and energy policy and delivering certainty about the future. Businesses agree that we can't make the same mistakes as the past by letting ambiguity and uncertainty undermine progress. Australia needs a credible, durable framework to reach its climate targets and grow the economy. The Australian Industry Group, Innes Willox, said this: it's a good deal. Overall, industry will view the announced deal with some relief that pragmatism and reasonable compromise have prevailed. This gives industry the certainty it needs to make the investments it needs to both keep the lights on
Manager of
and
Opposition
industry
Business and the
moving.
Leader of the Nationals
And the Australian
will cease
Chamber of
interjecting.
Commerce said this: "We welcome the certainty the agreement
The Deputy
will
Leader
bring."
of the Opposition.
The certainty the agreement will bring. And the Australian Pipelines and Gas Association said this: APGA welcomes the certainty of the reformed safeguard mechanism, which will help Australia reach its emission reduction targets faster. That's what we had to say.
The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting or will be warned.
No wonder, Mr Speaker, that the member for Bass had to say this. I'm utterly exasperated by the lack of engagement from my own side to come to the table and engage in a constructive conversation about how the safeguard mechanism could be improved. Now, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition says, how is this relevant comment from one of her own backbenchers? Well, I tell you what. I tell you what is relevant is that we are getting on with the job of delivering. Those opposite could try and get anywhere near this. Anyone who lives anywhere near the seat of Aston, unlike their candidate for Aston, anyone who lives anywhere near it is.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Before I call the member for Lalor, I'm pleased to invite order. The member for Casey is warned. Trying to acknowledge some guests in the gallery. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is a delegation from the South West Queensland Regional Organisation of Councils, and also the Honourable Claire Scriven, MLC Minister in the Parliament of South Australia. A very warm welcome to you all. Give the call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How do the Albanese Labor government's safeguard reforms deliver policy certainty for business and industry? And what will be the investment benefits as a result of these reforms? And how have they been received, Minister?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for her very important question. And it is a very good day for manufacturing jobs in Australia with the passage of the National Reconstruction Fund through the Parliament. And again, I'm sure honourable members join me in congratulating the Minister for Industry for his work in getting this bill passed through both houses of Parliament. And if the last few years have reminded us of anything, Mr Speaker, they've reminded us of the importance of sovereign capability, of the ability of our country to make things, the ability of our country to supply our own needs as much as possible in key strategic industries. And that's also important for our renewable energy transformation. Making the things that make renewable energy is the key to our economic success, Mr Speaker. And that's the case in particular in relation to aluminium and alumina and steel and cement. Now, the House knows that business has been very supportive of the government's reform agenda. We recognise again the support of the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, ACCI, and the Investor Group on Climate Change and many other groups. So I want to particularly mention today the support received from Manufacturing Australia to the changes announced to the safeguard reform earlier in the week. The CEO of Manufacturing Australia, Benede, said, "Australia has profound opportunities to create and retain high-quality jobs and grow its manufacturing sector through a carefully managed transition to low-emissions manufacturing." And of course that's the case, Mr Speaker. Of course that's the case. And that's why this government's package, which has passed the House and is currently receiving scrutiny in the Senate, and which I'm confident will go well, that scrutiny, that's why that package has emphasised the importance of those strategic industries and manufacturing across the board. That manufacturing increasingly will be required for domestic purposes and for export purposes to show their decarbonisation plans. Investors demand it, insurance demands it, and consumers demand it. That's the key to our bright manufacturing future, Mr Speaker. That's the key to our reforms. So when you put the National Reconstruction Fund together with the safeguards reforms, you see a real plan for Australian manufacturing. And the Climate Council put it well. The Climate Council put it well when they said The era of climate gridlock in Australia is over. The era of climate gridlock in Australia is over because this government gets things done. This Prime Minister gets things done. And what gridlock led to was investment uncertainty. What gridlock leads to is a lack of investment in jobs and job creation. What getting rid of gridlock fixes is the roadblock to a better manufacturing future for Australia, and under this government we will be a country that makes things.
Give the call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Before the election, the Prime Minister promised Australians that they'd be better off and have cheaper mortgages under a Labor government. But NAB yesterday reported increases in the number of households reporting financial difficulties, with households, quote, starting to feel the pinch and getting more worried about their financial future. When will this out-of-touch Prime Minister finally admit that Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question, and she asked a question about the commitment that we had at the WA election launch there at Optus Stadium on the shared equity scheme. It's a shared equity scheme. It's a shared equity scheme
members on my left.
Based upon the WA model. It's one that the Perrottet government, was implementing in New South Wales. The Andrews government in Victoria.
One more time. Prime Minister, I'll just pause. The continual interjections by the member for Barker every single day is not helpful or respectful at all. If it continues once more today, he'll be asked to leave. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And the member suggests somehow that that the Liberals, when they're in government, people don't pay more. The fact is that inflation, the peak of inflation in terms of the largest ever jump in any quarter this century was in March 2022, and the jump was 2.1%. The fact is also that the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison government was the second highest taxing government in modern Australian economic history. The highest, of course, was the Howard government. The fact is that interest rates, when this man was the Assistant Treasurer, were 6.75%, which is higher than 3.6%. 6.75 compared with 3.6. And the fact is that the budget papers accompanying Josh Frydenberg's final budget confirmed not just that there were no surpluses over the forwards, instead the coalition was on track to rack up $224 billion in additional borrowings over 4 years, and the intergenerational report produced by them showed that no budget would be in surplus in any year between now and 2060. That's in spite of the fact that in the lead-up to the election in which they attained office in 2013, the then Shadow Treasurer and the then Liberal Party said they would have surpluses each and every year going forward. They never delivered. They stopped the 30 years of consecutive economic growth thanks to the Hawke-Keating economic reforms. The fact is that those opposite talk a big game, but they never ever deliver.
The call to the member for McNamara.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Housing Australia Future Fund help build more social and affordable homes? What will the impacts be on people who need it most if the Housing Australia Future Fund is further delayed?
Give the call to the Minister for Homelessness, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for McNamara for that important question and say it was great to be with him in his electorate to meet tenants of an affordable rental property that was made possible through federal government money in his electorate. And what a great success it is, and it shows that it can be done. And as I was getting up to answer my question, Mr Speaker, we heard from those opposite, why aren't you building the houses? And of course, we aren't building the houses from the Housing Australia Future Fund yet because, of course, people are delaying it in the Senate, Mr Speaker. And, of course, people over here, of course, voted against it.
Order.
But we have heard the pleas, Mr Speaker. We've heard the pleas. We've heard the pleas from workers on the front line, people who deal day in, day out, from people who have no safe, affordable place to call home. As Everybody's Home pointed out, even, quote, full-time breadwinners are now living in tents, close quotes. The news is full of stories of people who are finding it tough, families sleeping in cars, young people having to choose between paying the rent or buying food.
The Minister will just pause for a moment. The member for Deakin is continually interjecting on the Minister. He'll be in the same boat as the member for Barker. So just cool it with the interjections. Give the call to the Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. We all in this place hear stories from people who are dealing with rising rents, forced to couch surf, or are contacting our electorate offices with nowhere to go. This is what our Housing Australia bill is about. It's about people. So I say to the members in this place who seem to have forgotten that, please don't just write to me about social housing and homelessness. Get your senators in the Senate to vote for more social and affordable housing. So say to the members for Riverina, the member for Bradfield, the member for Hughes, go back to your electorates and say you stood in the way of more social and affordable housing for your constituents when you write letters to me. Say that to them.
Member for Lawler.
We introduced our Housing Australia Future Fund to help people, to build tens of thousands of social and affordable rental homes for some of the most vulnerable in our community. Our housing agenda is ambitious because it needs to be, Mr Speaker. And I want to remind members in this place that the Housing Australia Future Fund will build more social and affordable homes in its first 5 years than were built over the past decade from the combined contributions from the Commonwealth, state and territory governments. That is what we're talking about. There's a substantial number of homes for people in need, women and children who are fleeing family violence, for older women at risk of homelessness, and for veterans who can't afford a safe, affordable place to call home. For the people that need help, we want to do it with the Housing Australia Future Fund. So I say to the Liberal senators and to the Green senators, please don't stand in the way. I say to them, you cannot address our country's housing challenges by standing in the way of real action. This is not an opportunity to delay action because there is a cost to delays, and the costs are being borne by the people that need our support most.
The Minister's time has concluded. Give a call to the honourable member for Petrie.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns what my constituents in Petrie have said to me about Labor's cost of living crisis. Georgina said 2 of us spend $300 plus on groceries. It just keeps going up and up. Chanel said family of 5 used to spend $400 a fortnight for a huge shop. Now we need to set aside an extra $200 per fortnight. These quotes are from this week in 2023. When will this out-of-touch Prime Minister finally admit that Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, Australians paid more under the coalition in inflation because the largest increase in any quarter this century was March 2022, 2.1%. Australians paid more tax, The highest taxing government in modern Australian history was, of course, the Howard government. The second highest was, you guessed it, the Abbott-Turnbull-Morrison government. That's a fact. The deficit was larger under those opposite. Now, we understand that there are inflationary pressures in the economy. Today, the inflation figures have come off a bit, the monthly figures, but we understand there is more work to be done. We understand the pressure that constituents, such as the ones mentioned by the member for Petrie, I assume, I never actually get the correspondence, but I'll take him at his word. He's He's a Dolphins fan, so he can probably be trusted. I'll take him at his word. We understand that people are under pressure, and that's why I just hope that the member for Petrie told those people that, yeah, that's true. I get that it's tough. Sorry for voting against $1.5 billion of energy price relief.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. In light of today's monthly consumer price index, how is the Albanese Labor government responding to the inflation challenge in the economy?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the wonderful member for Cunningham for her question as well. As the Prime Minister said a moment ago, the ABS has released the monthly inflation gauge, which shows that consumer prices rose 6.8% in the 12 months to February, which is down from 7.4% in last month's figures. And as I've said before, we do need to be careful about this new measure of inflation, which will be volatile month to month. But on the face of it, this is a very encouraging sign. It's also a sign of the economic times around the world that a number with a 6 in front of it is still seen as welcome news. But this is more evidence that inflation is moderating in our economy, but it remains unacceptably high. It's more evidence that inflation peaked at the end of last year and it's moderating this year, but it will be higher than we'd like for longer than we'd like. Now, we do understand that Australians are under the pump from cost of living pressures, and that's why inflation is still the primary focus of our three-part economic plan and the major influence on the budget that I will hand down in just under 6 weeks from this dispatch box. It's why it's so important that our strategy has 3 parts: relief, repair and restraint. Cost of living relief where it's affordable and where it's responsible and where there's an economic dividend, whether it's cheaper early childhood education, cheaper medicines, getting wages moving again, or providing some relief from higher power bills, the measure that those opposite voted against. Repair of our busted supply chains, a really important reason why it was so important that the parliament did pass the National Reconstruction Fund earlier today. And restraint so that we're getting genuine value for money for our investments in our economy and in our people, and cleaning up the mess that those opposite left behind when they left office. Now, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, can hide from the voters of Aston, but he can't hide from his record as a central figure in the Morrison government, which left programs unfunded and had nowhere near enough to show for $1 trillion in Liberal Party debt. He can't hide from the fact that the worst quarter for inflation last year was the March quarter.
Treasurer will resume his seat. I'll hear from the manager.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, you have in the past directed the Treasurer and others back to the terms of the question, which had nothing about the Leader of the Opposition's record. He should return to the subject matter of the question.
I'm going to draw the Treasurer back to the question. He's had a compare and contrast. I'm bringing him back to the question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. The question was inflation. The worst quarter for inflation was the March quarter last year, when the member for Dixon was a member of the Expenditure Review Committee in the Morrison government. He can't hide from that. Mr Speaker, Australians understand that a lot of these inflationary pressures come at us from around the world, but some of them are homegrown as well, and a decade of economic mismanagement has made people more vulnerable to these shocks. That's why we are working in a methodical and responsible way to put together a budget that takes some of the pressure off people who are dealing with cost of living pressures, even as inflation moderates in our economy in welcome ways.
Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. When electricity bills were rising, you pulled together all the states and territories and got parliaments across the country recalled to deal with it. With a fully fledged rental crisis gripping millions of people around the country who need help right now, not in the future, but right now, will you show the same level of urgency and organise a national rent freeze?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Melbourne for his question. I do have a proposal to change the Constitution that we've been talking about here, but that sort of measure would require us to take over from state and territory governments, and he knows it. And one of the things that I won't do, won't do is promise absolute pixie dust, because that's what that is. That's what that is. The
members on my
fact is that the Commonwealth government and the member knows full well. Oh, come on. No.
Order. The Prime Minister will. Just the Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Well, the Prime Minister will pause, and you'll need to state the standing order that you're referring to.
Well, clearly, it's Mr. Speaker. Very clearly, the Prime Minister is he going to sit down?
No. The Prime Minister is being in order. I have asked you to state the point of order.
I can't, Mr. Speaker, having sought the call, having been given the call, as practice is the case in this House, the Prime Minister should have the courtesy of sitting down, unless the rules don't apply equally in this Parliament.
The Prime Minister will pause, and unless the Leader of the Opposition states what the point of order is, the standing order, he'll be sat down as well.
Of course it's on relevance, Mr. Speaker.
Resume
I've never heard $275.
Resume your seat. The member for Hume, the House will come to order immediately, otherwise people will be excluded from the House. The member for Longman is warned. Prime Minister will return to the question.
Angry Peter's back.
The Prime Minister will refer to members by their correct titles and will continue with his answer.
He made appearances on corflutes last Saturday, Mr. Speaker. He mightn't have been able to go to New South Wales, but we made sure he was there. We made sure he had a big presence.
The member for Fairfax.
And I'll give you the big tip, he'll be there in Aston too on Saturday. Now, the Greens Party ask about housing policy and ask about the cost of housing. I say to the Greens political party, pass our Housing Australia Future Fund, because you can't have credibility coming in here saying we don't think $10 billion is enough, we want $20 billion, therefore we'll oppose $10 billion. It's just absurd to vote for zero rather than to vote for progress. The Housing Australia Future Fund is on top of the Housing Accord. It's on top of the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement. It's on top of the homelessness plan that we have as well. It's in addition to Commonwealth rent assistance as well. All of those measures represent a comprehensive plan. But one of the things that we do not have control over, and the member knows quite well that we are not able to do, is as a Commonwealth government flick a switch and demand a rent freeze. He knows that that is not possible, he knows it's not real, and he should do better than come in here and make statements that he knows can't be delivered. We can deliver something. He can talk to his senators across there and say, unblock the filibuster and nonsense that's around the Housing Australia Future Fund that will make a difference for emergency housing, that will make a difference for affordable and social housing.
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's paid parental leave changes increase support to working families after nearly a decade of policy stagnation?
Give a call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to also thank the member for Adelaide for his question and, of course, his advocacy for families in his electorate. Earlier this month, the government's paid parental leave legislation passed the Parliament. And now, from the 1st of July, over 180,000 families each year will benefit from a stronger and improved paid parental leave scheme. Families can now start pre-claiming under the more generous means testing provisions and the more flexible arrangements. We know that raising children and managing work is a juggle for many Australian families. We also know it's a time when there's lots of bills to pay and families need all the help they can get. Our changes mean that from the 1st of July this year, not only will more parents have access to the government payment, but they'll also have more flexibility in how they transition back to work. And of course, by 2026, our government will have expanded paid parental leave to allow parents to take 6 months of government-paid parental leave. Now, this approach, of course, has been backed by a range of organisations such as Minderoo, Thrive by 5, who said that a more generous paid parental leave scheme will benefit parents, infants, employers, employees and the Australian economy. In response to the inquiry into the government's changes to PPL, the Australian Institute of Family Studies said by ensuring all parents have access to paid parental leave is important, and it's important to provide parents with options at the birth or adoption of their child. And of course, the Chief Executive Women welcomed the expansion of paid parental leave as beneficial for women, for families, for children and for the economy. Of course, Mr Speaker, our significant investment helps make up for the 9 years of wasted time by those opposite. As a result of the 9 years of coalition government neglect, Australia's paid parental leave scheme lagged behind the rest of the OECD. But of course, Mr Speaker, the intention of those opposite when in government went beyond than just neglect. The Leader of the Opposition would know all too well about that, as he was a Cabinet Minister in the coalition government that tried to cut the entitlements for thousands of families to access both government-paid parental leave and their workplace entitlement. In the 2015-16 budget, those opposite tried to end what they insultingly called double-dipping, when mothers rightfully claimed both their workplace and government entitlements. This is a disgrace. Paid parental leave is a proud Labor legacy, and the Albanese government is building and expanding on that legacy. We will not cut it.
Call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The body representing small businesses in the hospitality sector, the Restaurant and Catering Association, has warned Australians that cafes and restaurants are having to jack up prices because of Labor's higher electricity prices and rising interest rates. When will this out-of-touch Prime Minister finally admit that Australian families and businesses always pay more under Labor?
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Lindsay for her question, and I say I was there in Lindsay last Friday in Penrith. With the former Mayor Karen McKeon. And Karen McKeon and I were talking with small businesses there in Penrith, and there in Penrith, the small businesses that we spoke to gave us a very warm welcome. We went there to the Westfield in Penrith and we talked to the new coffee shop owner that had been open just for a few weeks, and they were optimistic about their future. Optimistic. We spoke to restaurateurs, we spoke to all the small businesses in the heart of Penrith there, and on last Saturday they responded, Mr Speaker. They responded by electing Karen McKeon as the member for Penrith with a record swing in that electorate. Because one of the things that they were looking for in Penrith when I was there was an end to the sort of Eeyore philosophy of those opposite. You know, it's all doomed, the world's going to end, everything's all terrible. I mean, those opposite are turning into one of those cults that say the world's going to end. I mean, every time the Senate passes a piece of legislation, they put their robes on. They all get ready, because it's all going to end. Whether it's the safeguard mechanism, whether it's the National Reconstruction Fund, whether it's industrial relations. Remember the IR legislation? They said small business was going to be destroyed by that. There were going to be mass strikes. The only strike we've seen has been from the Leader of the Opposition entering New South Wales. That's the only strike that we've seen. The fact is that we are getting on with the business of making a positive difference. Whether it's the actions such as safeguard mechanism, whether it's dealing with supply chain issues through the National Reconstruction Fund, whether it's housing through our Housing Australia Future Fund, whether it be the industrial relations legislation, the legislation that I spoke on before question time about gender pay equity, all of these issues, what we're doing is working constructively for solutions, because that's what Australians are looking for. They had conflict fatigue. They want a government that will deliver, that will make a difference, notwithstanding the challenges that are before the global economy. A government that is actually legislating an agenda and making a positive difference, and that's the feedback I got in Penrith last Friday.
The call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government providing responsible cost of living relief to Australian families by making early childhood education and care more affordable?
The call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Bendigo for her question, but also take the time to acknowledge her deep commitment to families and children in her electorate in Bendigo. But I also want to thank the member for Bendigo for giving me this opportunity to speak about the Albanese Labor government's reforms to make early childhood education and care more affordable, Mr Speaker, because these will make a real and tangible difference for families right across Australia. 1.2 million families, as a matter of fact, including 265,000 families in rural and regional Australia. It is responsible cost of living relief that will reduce pressures on family budgets. It will support greater workforce participation and, importantly, it will enable more children to get the absolute best start in life in those critical first 5 years where 90% of brain development occurs. Mr Speaker, I can't count on two hands the number of people who have stopped me or who have written to me to demonstrate their gratitude to the Albanese Labor government for these reforms, who have said that this is not just going to give them relief for their household budgets, but it's going to open up opportunities for them and give them options, whether those options are taking on more hours at work, returning to work, or indeed taking on further study. But we know, Mr Speaker, we know that there is more to do, and that's why we have the ACCC report, review of the pricing in the early childhood education sector, as well as the Productivity Commission report exploring future options for early childhood education and care. We know also that a quality early childhood education and care sector that will deliver for our children requires a stable and supported workforce. Now, in an earlier answer, the Prime Minister mentioned a visit to Swinburne University and Swinburne TAFE that we did last Friday, and he mentioned there that we met with some students there who were taking up our fee-free TAFE places in early childhood education and care. And two of them, Tiana and Connor, spoke to us about why they were choosing early childhood education and care. And they said that it was their passion for children and their interest in child development that led them down this career pathway. And indeed, Mr Speaker, that's reflective of all people who take early childhood education and care and choose early childhood education and care as a career pathway. On this side of the House, we acknowledge them. We recognise them for the professionals that they are, for the important work that they do in educating our youngest Australians. And we will deliver for families, we will deliver for the sector, continuing to work with them on addressing the issues and fee relief for families in less than 100 days.
Give the call to the honourable member for Mayo.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The Department FOI response on selection criteria for the Community Batteries and for Household Solar Grants program stated the selections were determined by the Australian Labor Party while in opposition prior to the May 2022 federal election. The department was not involved in these decisions and therefore has no records or documents to show the criteria applied to processes involved in making improved the eligible selection locations. How is this different to sports rorts, Minister?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. But I must say, with respect to the honourable member, it would have been rather surprising if the Department of Climate Change and Energy was involved in election commitments we made from opposition. I'm not quite sure how that would have worked. These were election commitments for 58 community batteries out of a program of 400. And yes, they were election commitments that will be delivered. And I'm happy to report to the honourable member that the process of determining the service providers who will deliver those 58 is well in advance. The Business Grants Hub in the Department of Industry has called for tenders. Those tenders have closed. Those bids are being considered. In relation to the rest of the batteries, the rest of the 400, I'm very pleased to inform the honourable member that ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, will be calling for tenders and calling for bids, expressions of interest from communities and network service providers as to which communities should host the rest of those batteries. Yes, oppositions make election commitments. Yes, we do. Oppositions make election commitments. Governments, when elected, then deliver on those election commitments. So those 58 sites will be delivered. The rest of those sites are open for tender from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. That tender will start in the first week of April. I'm very pleased to advise the honourable member.
The minister has concluded his answer. The member for Mayo is seeking the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to seek leave to table the FOI report.
Is leave granted?
I presume if it's an FOI report, it's already public. So leave's not granted.
Give the call to the order. Give the call. Members on my left will cease interjecting immediately, so I can hear from the member for Banks. Will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting students with cost of living pressures as part of its plan to build a highly skilled workforce, particularly in areas of high demand? What has been the response to the government's plans?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, can I thank the member for Cornwall, Mr Speaker, for her question and for her strong advocacy in the vet sector and for TAFEs in North Melbourne and North West Melbourne. Can I say, and I think everyone would agree in this place, that on this side certainly, that we genuinely appreciate that education and training is transformative to a person's life. We understand that acutely, we understand that personally. It is absolutely transformative. Access to education and training, therefore, for students and workers to reskill or upskill in areas of emerging demand is really important and life-changing. It also increases, of course, the likelihood of good and secure work, good wages, career progression. In fact, in many respects, it is a change of the quality of life for people that acquire those skills, that knowledge and that education. And it's for that reason, of course, we need to ensure that people access training and education. And on the macro level, a skilled and knowledgeable workforce leads to a more productive and efficient economy, putting downward pressure on the costs of goods and services. So there's multiple benefits to improve the acquisition of skills and knowledge in our labour market. But to achieve these ends, we must remove financial barriers, Mr Speaker, to education and training, especially in areas of skill shortage or emerging skill shortages. That's why recently we struck 8 historic, game-changing agreements with state and territory governments, Labor and Liberal, to invest in 180,000 fee-free TAFE and vet places for 2023. That's an additional investment for this year, and that's providing, of course, opportunities for students and workers to acquire skills in emerging demand and existing demand so that they can be properly employed, they can find good work, secure work, and businesses can find the skills that they need. Now, Speaker, I have been asked what is the response to the government's plan. Well, I'm afraid to say that those opposite, if they had their way, would deprive thousands of students and workers with these opportunities. Because left to those opposite, Speaker, New South Wales students in aged care would have to find up to $1,400 $450 to continue to train in these skill shortage areas. Victorian students training in hospitality would have to find $3,419 to continue that course, and South Australian students training in the very important area of national security, cyber security courses, would have to find up to $6,521 to pay that course. The fact is, the opposition opposed fee-free TAFE, even though it helps students, it helps businesses and it helps the economy.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Barara.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, will the voice be justiciable?
I'm just going to order. I'm just going to ask the member for Barara to ask that question again. I didn't hear it. Order. The Prime Minister will just pause for a moment. I want to hear the question.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, will the voice be justiciable?
I think the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will not interject. She will cease interjecting immediately. The Prime Minister can answer. Well, I'll hear from the Leader of the House. Because anyway, give him a call.
Mr Speaker, Standing Order 98D expressly says what questioners must not ask ministers. There is nothing in this question other than a legal opinion. There's nothing. The entire question is a legal opinion. There's nothing else in it at all. If there was ever a question that just completely offends the prohibition in Standing Order 98, this is it.
I'll hear from the order. Members on my left, I'll hear from the Leader of the House, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. This question is completely in order. It goes to the design feature of the voice. It goes to public commentary that the Prime Minister has been making freely in relation to this very question, and he should be able to answer the question in this parliament.
The question is against standing orders, as the Leader of the House has clearly indicated. But I will give the member Barra, an opportunity to rephrase the question so it complies with standing orders. And if it doesn't, it will be ruled out of order.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Is it the government's policy intention that the voice be justiciable?
That question is in order as it regards a policy pertaining to the government. I'll give the Prime Minister the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm not a lawyer, but Robert French was a pretty good one.
Order.
The Chief Justice of Australia between 2008 and 2017.
The member for Bowman.
This is what he had to say about the words that have been put forward. The power of the Parliament is expanded under the revised paragraph 3 to cover laws with respect to matters relating to the voice generally. Thus, the Parliament can make laws about such things as the duties, if any, of the executive government in relation to any representation and the legal effect of representations to the government. So that was Justice French.
Order. Members on my left.
Very clearly.
The members on my left, I cannot hear what the Prime Minister is saying. Cease interjecting immediately.
Ken Hayne. Again, a former Justice of the High Court of Australia, someone who was chosen by those opposite to conduct royal commissions, had this to say. A lot of people have spent yesterday, so up to date, the Robert French comment was 25th of March. Ken Hayne said, a lot of people spent a long time trying to think, well, what possible quirks, legal, in inverted commas, minefields could there be? I think there are none. I think there are none. Ken Hayne. Ken Hayne.
Order.
And another prominent lawyer called Julian Leeser said this. From the perspective of a constitutional conservative, this proposal, I think, has two distinct merits. First, the proposal is designed in such a way that it doesn't empower the High Court to strike down acts of Parliament. Oh, come on.
Order. The Minister for Home Affairs, the Minister for Infrastructure. I'll hear from the point of order from the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance. The question was very specific. It was about the government's policy, citing examples and past legal commentary on previous models, etc., is not relevant to what is a very tight question. The Prime Minister of our country should be able to answer the most basic questions about the government's policy intent on a very major proposal.
Resume your seat. The Prime Minister was the question was phrased in a way that it was about the government's policy. He is referring to that. I'll bring him back to the question. He's entitled to add to his answer regarding evidence or information, and I'll give him the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. In a speech, I'm amazed that those opposite would disagree.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. Members on my right, the member for McNamara.
The anger. It just bubbles up.
The members on my right will cease interjecting so I can hear the Prime Minister.
First, the proposal is designed in such a way that it doesn't empower the High Court to strike down acts of the Parliament. There will be no new avenue to challenge laws in the High Court. He then went on to say, secondly, the proposal is designed to ensure that better policy making occurs in the Indigenous policy space. I tell you what, I agree with everything in terms of the government's intent is exactly the same as the intent that was shown by the member for Berowra over a long period of time. Exactly the same. Exactly the same. And that's why on so many occasions, he said, for example, I think one of the particularly good aspects—
Prime Minister's order.
Yes,
you do not need to yell out time. Anyone does that again, they'll be warned. It's highly disorderly. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting one more time and she will be warned. Order. When the House comes to order, I want to hear from the member for Reid.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cheaper medicines for Australians, and why is it important? How have pressures on the cost of healthcare changed over time?
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the terrific member for Reid, who worked so hard to win her electorate at the last election, including by promising her constituents to strengthen Medicare and deliver cheaper medicines. And I'm pleased to report to the member for Reid that in just the first 2 months of this year, her constituents have saved $272,000 on the price of medicines because we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. And even before that, Mr Speaker, we slashed the maximum amount that pensioners pay for medicines across a year by 25%, meaning they pay no more than $5 a week over the course of the year for all of their medicines needs, no matter how many scripts they get filled. In September, we cut the price of 2,000 brands of medicines, delivering $130 million back into the pockets of hard-working Australians. And, Mr Speaker, this Saturday will cut the price of 600 more brands of medicines, putting millions of dollars more back into the pockets of Australians. And, Mr Speaker, we're continuing to list life-changing, life-saving medicines on the PBS. This Saturday, Opdivo, the well-known medicine, will be expanded to certain esophageal and gastroesophageal cancers, benefiting 400 Australian patients who would otherwise be paying $85,000 for a course of that life-saving treatment, now just $30. Mr Speaker, the contrast between our approach on cheaper medicines and the approach pursued by the Leader of the Opposition when he was Health Minister could not be clearer. When he was Health Minister, the Leader of the Opposition tried to make medicines more expensive, not cheaper, but dearer. In his first budget as Health Minister, the Leader of the Opposition tried to jack up the price of medicines for every single Australian, including by $5 for every single general script. So down by $12.50 under us, up by $5 under that fellow. And while we slashed the price of PBS safety nets by 25%, he tried to jack up safety net thresholds for general concessional patients by as much as 10%, Mr Speaker, by as much as 10%. The Leader of the Opposition's Dearer Medicines policy would have ripped $1.3 billion out of the pockets of Australian patients had he had his way. And, Mr Speaker, he was proud of it. He was proud of it. Introducing the legislation to implement his Dearer Medicines policy, the Leader of the Opposition said this. He said it's another example of the Abbott government's work to protect the best interests of Australians. Mr Speaker, no wonder then he says here, here. Then he says here, here. Well, no wonder Australia's doctors overwhelmingly voted this man the worst health minister in the history of Medicare.
Could you call to the Prime Minister?
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions to be placed on the notice paper.